This Shabbos, Parshas Vayakol Pekudei, Shabbos Chazak, it's Rosh Chodesh benching. It's also Shabbos HaChodesh, the fourth of the Dalet Parshas. The Makor for the Dalet Parshas, all of the Dalet Parshas is already brought in the Mishnayos. It's a Mishnah in Megillah. We recently learned Masechtas Megillah. It's already Bizman HaMishnah. We read HaChodesh Hazeh, Parshas Bais from Perek Bais, bunch of Psukim Tol Chamishi, which begins about the mitzvahs KIddush HaChodesh, the first Psukim, HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim, the Mekadesh the Chodesh, and then many Psukim go into the mitzvahs, Korban Pesach, the halachas of Korban Pesach, brought la halacha, in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tafresh Pehei la halacha, the Dalet Parshas HaChodesh. What's the reason? Why do we read Parshas HaChodesh? We have spoken in the past, Shkolim, the reason for Shkolim, Zachar, last year Parshas Parah. What's the reason that we read Parshas HaChodesh? There's a few reasons in the Rishonim. Rashi, right there on the Mishnah, Rashi says the reason why we read the Parasha of HaChodesh is because most of the Psukim speak about Korban Pesach, and to prepare, soon is going to be Pesach, to know the halachas of Korban Pesach. Whether if it's Bizman HaBayis, or could be now it's a minig, because there used to be a Korban Pesach, a Tvilah for the Korban Pesach, but Rashi says very limited words because of the Korban Pesach. We read the Psukim because of the Korban Pesach. Obviously, we start at the beginning that starts HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim, but it's mainly because of all the Psukim of the Korban Pesach. The Ran, however, learns that it's not because of the later Psukim of the Korban Pesach, but rather because of the beginning Psukim of HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim. Meaning to say, it's in Yana de Yoima. The Kolba is marchav a little bit more. Technically, we could read HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem every single Rosh Chodesh, the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. But being that the Psukim in Yana de Yoima speak about HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim, it's the first Chodesh of all the months, and that's coming up this week, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So that's why we read this Shabbos, the Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh. So far we have two reasons for the Kriya, either because of Korban Pesach or because of Rosh Chodesh. The Yerushalmi has a question on the order of the Dalet Parshas, in particular to the second, the last two, the third and the fourth. First goes Parshas Parah, and then goes Parshas HaChodesh. So the Yerushalmi asks, Rashi brings the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi asks, really the order should be the opposite. First should go Parshas HaChodesh, which is HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim is Rosh Chodesh, and then Parshas Parah, which happened Bais Nisan. So the order should really be the opposite. First we should have Parshas HaChodesh, and then afterwards Parshas Parah. That's the Yerushalmi's question. The Yerushalmi answers because of Taras and Shal Yisrael, and needs understanding, but we're not going to go into it now. But just the Yerushalmi's question that first should be Parshas HaChodesh and then afterwards Parah, because first went Rosh Chodesh and then Parah was Bais Nisan. I want to ask you all, please, Bishloima Lefi the Ran, that the Ran says the reason why we read HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem al Rosh Chodesh. I understand the Yerushalmi's question. The Yerushalmi is asking, first goes Rosh Chodesh, and then afterwards goes Parshas Parah. Parshas Parah was Bais Nisan. So Lefi the Ran, I understand the question. But Lefi Rashi, how Rashi learns the reason why we read HaChodesh Hazeh Lechem Rosh Chodashim is really because of the later Psukkah, because of the Korban Pesach. It's true, we begin from HaChodesh Hazeh, but we're reading it for the Korban Pesach. All of the Korban Pesach started much later. Yud Nisan they started preparing 4 days before. So l'chayru, you have to understand what's the kasha. Rashi himself brings the Yerushalmi. What's the kasha of the Yerushalmi that the Yerushalmi is asking the order should be HaChodesh and then Para. It's true Parshas Para happened Bais Nisan, but the Kriya of HaChodesh of Korban Pesach is actually afterwards, Yud Nisan. So the order seemingly would yes be good.
Parshas was still set on Rosh Chodesh. It was told the motion.
You're absolutely right. You're being masbeh that the Yerushalmi's kasha is that the time of the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh was Rosh Chodesh.
I think Rashi's masking passively to the idea that once we're reading it and we're also reading it Rosh Chodesh. So, okay, so...
I mean, Rashi's also masking to what the Ran says, the part of Rosh Chodesh. It could be you get that as well also, but to have a kasha in the order, I mean, the Kriya Rashi says 2-3 words. Rashi says the reason why, the reason for the Kriya, so Rashi says, als Korban Pesach. You're right, you also get that. So that's why it should be before before Para Aduma. There's a third reason. The Levush says the reason, the Shiur brings the Levush. The Levush says the reason why we read the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, yet a third reason, if I understand correctly, not like what the Ran says, als in Yonah de Yoima, but a little bit different. The HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim is speaking about the mitzvah of KIddush HaChodesh. How did KIddush HaChodesh go about? And that's what the Pasuk is giving us the mitzvah. Adam came, they said they saw the Levana, Bezin said Mekodesh, and that's when Rosh Chodesh came about. KIddush HaChodesh. Says the Levush, we no longer have that mitzvah, but at least the Rabbanan made something, a kriyah the Rabbanan bedoime to that mitzvah. Again, technically, we could read it every Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. It's not bedafka to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, but Lamaisa could be also because now's when it happened. But says the Levush, the reason why we have Parshas HaChodesh this week, a Kriya Midrabanan, somewhat to emulate to what the mitzvah in Torah was of Kiddush HaChodesh when there was a Bezdin, and Adam came to Mekadosh the Levana. To be made on the Levana, Bezdin said Mekodesh. And yet a fourth reason why we have Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh is the Pnei Yeshua. If I understand the Pnei Yeshua correctly, you could be ba'ayin more, but the Pnei Yeshua is bothered with the Mishnah that says these are the 4 weeks, Uberavi HaChodesh this week. Then the Mishnah says afterwards, Ubechamishi you go back to regular. The Gemara actually speaks about what's going back to regular, what changed. Did we change anything? As a matter of fact, we read the whole parsha, we just add on a mafter. So Lamaisa, at least one pshat of the Gemara says the Haftorah goes back to regular. Up until now, we switched out the Haftorah, including this week, not to the Haftorah's Parshas HaShavua, but rather to the Haftorah connected to Para, to HaChodesh. So we go back to regular and Haftorah. But the Pnei Yeshua is bothered. What does it mean, Chayzel L'Kach Sidron?
That's what we do. We don't say special Haftorah for Parsha HaChodesh?
No, we do. This week, the 4th week, we say a special Haftorah. But then next week, which is the 5th week, we go back to regular. The past, not 4 weeks, but the Dalit Parshas, there was a special Haftorah for Shkolim, a special Haftorah for Zocher, speaking about the story with Shalom Melech and Agag, and then Parshas Parah last week, also speaking about Taras and Shal Yisrael, this week HaChodesh. But then next week we go back to the regular Haftorah connected to the Parsha. There are Haftorahs, by the way, on these Parshas also, like let's say if it's a leap year next year, if this Shabbos does not fall out to be a Shabbos that's it's just a week, not of the Dalit Parshas, then there's Haftorah for the week. So Chayzel L'Kasidron. So Pnei Yeshua wants to understand, you have to say you go back next week to the regular. I mean, of course, these 4 weeks, you switch out the Haftorah, and these are the 4 weeks. I mean, obviously, if next week there's nothing special, so then automatically you're back to the regular. What's Chayzel L'Kasidron? So the Pnei Yeshua says, that the reason why we read HaChodesh, again, if I understand it correctly, the reason why we read Parshas HaChodesh is because of the halacha of Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag. You learn the halachas of Yom Tov. There's a halacha, before every Yom Tov, you're supposed to go through the halachas, you're supposed to prepare the halachas. What'd you say? You ready in? Okay, so I'm going to jump right ahead, which the Chok Yaakov says, that's the reason for Parshas Parah also. That's a Parshas Parah de Geshmuz, but he says already Parshas Parah, this that you're saying, where do you start? Really, there's a discussion about it in the Poskim. The Chok Yaakov brings from Rishonim that, you start right after Purim, which is pretty much 30 days before. The halach is really supposed to start Purim. What did you say? Right, so I hear, you're right. So exactly then, maybe it's hard for people to remember. It's more than halacha. Purim, you're supposed to start Purim, but at least the Shabbos after is Parshas Parah. But says the Pnei Yeshua, the Kriya for this Shabbos, what does it have to do with learning the halachas? Of course it has to do with learning the halachas of Korban Pesach. You're right, it's not a full 30 days, but at least we're starting before learning the halachas. Says the Pnei Yeshua, we would have a havamina that we shouldn't only have Parshas HaChodesh this week. We should have it the next 2 weeks as well also. Why? Just now it's Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag. If anything, like he says, Kolshke next week, for sure you should read the Parsha of HaChodesh, for sure. Closer to Pesach to learn the halachas. That's why the Mishnah says, Chayzer l'kasidram, not to read again Parshas HaChodesh. But why taka not? Why taka don't we read HaChodesh next week also? Why taka not? Says the Pnei Yeshua, because really the Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag is really, like he says, to learn it in Bais Medrash, Talmud to a Rabbi to the Talmud, learning the halachas in Bais Medrash, like we're doing here. The Koil Boiker is now learning the halachas of Yom Tov. So that's Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag, learning the halachas of Yom Tov, Shaykh to Masechtas Be'er. But that's where the Shoyl and V'Darshim, Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag is really sitting and learning through the halachas, as opposed to reading it in the Torah. The Pnei Yeshua says it's ein ze ela minig siyag u'minig ba'alma. It's not the real thing. That's the lashon of Pnei Yeshua. Ein ze ela siyag and minig ba'alma. It's somewhat of a shvacher shoyl and v'darshim. Therefore, we do it this Shabbos, but not all the Shabbosim. As a matter of fact, the Maril says the reason why we say Yotzrish for Shabbos HaGadol, if you take a look in the Yotzrish, it goes through all the halachas. I bought myself a Pirush Yotzrish, just to see it goes through all the halachas of kashering, all the halachas of Pesach. So the Maril says, you say it because of Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag. There it's already big time, not the 30 days before, it's right before. I think if it's Erev Pesach, Shechal Shabbos could be a taka. Say it the week before, I don't remember now, it happened a few years ago. But this concept, so to speak, of Shoyl and V'Darshim, Maril says is also for Shabbos HaGadol. Al Koponim, this is a fourth reason for the Kriya of Parshas HaChodesh. Just to sum it up before we go to the part 2 of the Shiur, we said Rashi says the reason why we read Parshas HaChodesh Pashat because of Korban Pesach, to know the halachas. The Ran says we read HaChodesh because it's in Yana de Yoima. The Psukim, HaChodesh is Elachem Rosh Chodashim, happened now, Rosh Chodesh, Nisan. The Levush says the reason for the Kriya, because it's connected to KIddush HaChodesh, which is going to be soon Rosh Chodesh, but we can't do KIddush HaChodesh, you need a Bezdin, so at least we read about it, Kriya Midrabanan. And lastly, we saw now this last shot of the Pnei Yeshua, Shoyl and V'Darshim, Shloshim Yom Koydem HaChag, so we're learning the halachas of Pesach. I would like to move over now to something that's really relevant every Rosh Chodesh benching. It's Negei, this Shabbos is Rosh Chodesh benching, but it's also, we'll see, somewhat connected, or is it connected or not? We saw the Levush says the reason why we read Kriyas HaChodesh now, Why do we read Kriyas HaChodesh? Because it's connected to the Kiddush HaChodesh of when there was a Beis Din. The Rosh Chodesh benching that we say every Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh, does that have to do anything with the Kiddush HaChodesh of when there was a Beis Din?
It's a zecher, no?
Is it a zecher? Very good. Let's see, Taka. The Magen Avram says has nothing to do. We'll see. No, but what you said zecher, by the way, is we'll see in a moment that it's right halfway and halfway not. We'll see. It's connected to some extent. The Magen Avram says has nothing to do with Kiddush HaChodesh. Has nothing to do. The Levush says that it can't even be a zecher. Why not? Because Kiddush HaChodesh, when did they do Kiddush HaChodesh? When the Edom came on Rosh Chodesh, they saw the Levana, and they were made that he was a Levana, so Beis Din said Makudish. And then everybody around said Makudish, Makudish. Here, when do we say Rosh Chodesh benching? We say it actually earlier, before. So what is it? What is it? It's a achraza. It's an announcement. Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, that line, b'yoyim ha'chamishi. It's an announcement. You know, by the Svardim, they announce also, over there's an announcement for Tanesim. Minig Ashkenaz, we don't do it, but at least by some of the Tanesim, Minig, the Svardim, it's brought in the Mechaber, you make a achraza. So it's a achraza, it's to tell people, it's an announcement. Rabbi say, this Thursday is Rosh Chodesh. We're going to get to Be'ez Hashem, the other parts. We don't just say Rosh Chodesh Nisan Yeh, these other parts, Misha Asa Nisan. We'll see how this all comes in, but at least it's an announcement.
What's this? Why is it called Kiddush, Rosh Chodesh benching?
So, Lamaisa, the part of benching is really the next part, Yichadasheyu, right afterwards, we're Mevorchim as HaChodesh. We're Mevorchim as HaChodesh. Once we're there already, we're machris, so we're ready, we're mevorach the Chodesh. It's to be a Chodesh of Toivo, Bracha, and Shalom. We're mevorach the Chodesh.
What teach the groups of the Svardim that they say Tanesim? Why don't they say everything? I'm saying it's to be machris. Why don't they make all the machris from
You want to know why Yom Tov also there should be machris? I think it's a good question. You have to be ma'ayim more, but I think for Yom Tov it's pretty oiskecheshment. You know, if let's say we're going to be machris now that Thursday is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, what'd you say? You're right. People know what day it is. But I think you have to remind people. So you say you have to remind also people that are not all Tanesim, by the way, but Lamaisa. We got to also, connect it. First of all, because if not, why am I saying it? I mean, I could say it because it's every Rosh Chodesh mention, but we gotta stick up from a shulam that it's connected. So, Lamaisa, the Mar Makaimis, the Loshen, just to start, the Machtas HaShekel actually says, and he goes on the next piece of the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says there's nothing to do with Kiddush HaChodesh. However, says the Magen Avram, the minig is to say Rosh Chodesh benching ba'amida, to stand. And as the Machtas HaShekel explains why, he says Zecher l'Kiddush HaChodesh. When you makadosh the Chodesh, al pi Ariyah was ba'amida, so there is a Zecher. So there is a connection. We stand by Rosh Chodesh benching because when we used to makadosh the Chodesh, it was ba'amida. The Aruch HaShulchan, whose yahrzeit was this week, the Aruch HaShulchan says another connection of our Rosh Chodesh benching is that we're machris the moiled. Why are we machris the moiled? You ever wondered? Why is it so important? You want to know when Kiddush Levana is going to be? What is it so important to be machris the moiled? Says the Aruch HaShulchan, the way he says is, the pshita, that at the time of Kiddush HaChodesh, when there was a Beis Din, it goes without saying that the Beis Din knew when the Moiled was. It means interesting, Beis Din knew, even though they were Makabel Eidim, they knew what the Levana, they knew when the Moiled is, if it's even possible, if it makes sense, they for sure knew. And that's how we're machris the Moiled. tomorrow, when the Gaba is going to be machers the moiled, you know why we do it? Because when they used to be Kiddush HaChodesh, the Bezdin knew when the moiled was. But what did we say? Kiddush HaChodesh, Rosh Chodesh benching is a hachraz, is an announcement. So why do we announce it to Shabbos before? Why don't we renounce? Maybe on Rosh Chodesh to announce. Why dafka on Shabbos? So the Aruch HaShulchan says, as well as also the Bnei Yissaschar speaks about it, that being that it's Beroivam, people come to Shul Shabbos during the week, people are busy, less people make it to Shul, so it's just a practical time. There's a lot of people in Shul, we announce it on Shabbos. There's nothing bedafka to do with Shabbos. Technically, it could be the Sunday before, it could be the day of, the day before. But what did we say? We said that the Kiddush HaChodesh, Rosh Chodesh benching, is connected. Why? It's connected for the reason of Ba'amida. Right? The Magen Avraham says it's connected, it has a shaychus, we stand. Frekter Kiveger, we don't find anywhere that by Kiddush HaChodesh there was Amida that they stood. Not only that, Rabbi Kiveger says the Mashmoyas in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah in the beginning of the third parak is actually that they sat. So what is the Magen Avraham saying? We stand Rosh Chodesh benching because they stood by Kiddush HaChodesh with the Bezdin. Frekter Kiveger, where do you see they stood? Not only where do you see they stood, just the opposite, they actually sat. There are two terutzim. One teretz, lefi what it's mevur in the Sefer Eshkol, to explain why we stand Kiddush Levana. This is a third thing. We gave some shiurim a bunch of weeks ago about Kiddush Levana, but the halacha is Kiddush Levana is Ba'amida. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch. You're supposed to stand by Kiddush Levana. And he explains the following. Sviras ha'omer, you're supposed to stand. Why do you have to stand by Sviras ha'omer? Brought in Halacha and Shulchan Aruch. The Makor is not a Gemara, the Makor is a Rush, with a drasha, Hachel, Bakama, not going to go into it now, but there's a drasha to stand by Sviras ha'omer. The same is also by Tkiyah Shofar you're supposed to stand, and the same is also by Tzitzis. Why? Because he's a drasha. First of all, he's a drasha by Sviras ha'omer. It's very interesting because it's the Rishonim. It's not like a Gemara. And then there's a hekesh of lochem. By all places it says lochem. So a makish tzitzis and shofar also is ba'amida. The Avud Raham says a remes atzas Hashem la'olam samoid. Atzas, the Rosh Tevis of atzas, ayin tzadik taf. Ayin is oimer. Tzadik is tzitzis, and Taf is Tkiyah Shofar. So for those you're supposed to stand. Says the Eshkol, the same thing is very interesting. The same thing is also Kiddush Levana, because of the drush. It also says Lachem by Kiddush HaChodesh to stand. So what's going on here? Rabbi Kivega asked that they sat, so they sat or they stood. The teretz is Bezdin sat, but there was a din for the Eidim to stand. Not just it happens to be they stood based off what we're saying now. Just like Shofar is Ba'amida, it says Lochem by Kiddush HaChodesh. HaChodesh hazeh Lochem, Rosh Chodashim. It says Lochem, so Kiddush HaChodesh is also Ba'amida.
That's not exclusive to Kiddush. Whatever student in front of the Bezdin would say. I hear what you're saying, but being that it says lochem and it's a din miyuchet, meaning to say is it says it particularly over here, maybe that's a reason why we stand by Kiddush Levana, by Rosh Chodesh benching tomorrow. Rav Moshe Feinstein in a tshuva has a different teretz to explain. It's a long geschmack tshuva in the yesod of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. And he says, there was one part of Kiddush HaChodesh that the Bezdin took the Eidim, listened to the Eidim,
and if they accepted the edus, they said HaChodesh. By the way, if they didn't say HaChodesh, nothing happened yet. If they missed it, like it says Lahispik, they didn't get to it, then they missed the day and it's the next day. However, after Bezdin said HaChodesh, there was a din that all the people around should say HaChodesh, HaChodesh. A separate din, a mitzvah. A mitzvah's Kiddush HaChodesh. That wasn't what made Kiddush HaChodesh, but after the Bezdin said HaChodesh, the Bezdin said HaChodesh once, the people around said HaChodesh, HaChodesh. That Amira was a mitzvah by itself. And Rav Moshe says, I forgot if he has a Rabbi, but he says, even the Bezdin afterwards joined in to say HaChodesh, HaChodesh. Says Rav Moshe, the Bezdin paskening HaChodesh was sitting. The people, the Kiyam HaMitzvah, like Rav Moshe says, all mitzvahs you find Ba'amida, that also was Ba'amida. He even says that if the Bezdin also joined into the mitzvah, the Bezdin stood up together with everyone else that was standing to say HaChodesh, HaChodesh. So Mamela, this is another yishuv on Reb Kivega's question. Kivega asked, we say Rish Chodesh benching Ba'amida to Zecher to the Kiddush HaChodesh. Kiddush HaChodesh is Ba'amida? In fact, Reb Kivega, they were sitting. The answer is, of course they were sitting. But the second part, which was the mitzvah of HaChodesh, HaChodesh, that was Ba'amida. Just to conclude, real quickly, some other protei dinim. We'll see how much as we can cover. I want to end on time. We say Misha Asa Nisim. Before Rosh Chodesh Nisan Yeh B'Yom HaChamishi. Before that, we say Misha Asa Nisim. Why do we say Misha Asa Nisim? How does it come in? Maspalol, the Eibush Hashem makabetz us with. It's a nice tefillah to say always. How does it come into Rosh Chodesh benching? So the Lavush says that the reason why we say it, and in fact also connected now to HaChodesh, is because the first time for Kiddush HaChodesh, which was now the Parsha of HaChodesh Hazeh, was at the time that we went out of Mitzrayim. And therefore, Mispalel, just like the Eibush took us out of Mitzrayim, the Eibush should take us out of this Golus. But it's not, we could always be Mispalel to come out of Golus. But here it has a special connection because the mitzvah's Kiddush HaChodesh came about at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He brings another reason. The other reason he says is because we're being maspawel that we should be able to do the proper Kiddush HaChodesh, not just Rosh Chodesh benching, the proper Kiddush HaChodesh, which means Al Pi Ariyah. But that the Lavush says I don't like. Why? Because we're being maspawel for the Bais HaMikdash to come to Kibbutz Goliath. He says even after the Churban Abayis, they were still being Makadosh Al Pi Ariyah. So we're being maspawel for the Kibbutz Goliath. Even after Klal Yisrael went to Goliath, we also were Makadosh Al Pi Ariyah. But for this, the Derech Pekudecha goes along these lines with a little bit of a twist, and it's B'Yashem. And with this, I'm going to conclude. In Derech Pekudecha, he says, why did it come about that we stopped Kiddush HaChodesh Al Pi Alavana? Even after the Churban. Why? Hillel saw that Klal Yisrael is being spread out all over the place. And people are not going to know from one community to the next. They're not going to be updated when the Kiddush Alavana was. And could you imagine how it would look? This community has Pesach that day, and the next community has a different day, and it's going to be all over the place. The Nirik Shtei Torahs. Could you imagine everyone has a different Yom Tov, a different day? So Meir Hill came Eis Lasis Lashem, and he made a takon of the calendar. Like this, everybody runs off the same calendar. It's Pesach over here, the same day as in Eretz Yisrael, in Europe, in Australia. It's all the same thing. You run off the calendar. Meir says in Derech B'Gedecha, we're mispalel that we should have kibbutz golius, because the reason why we lost the mitzvah is because we were spread all over the place. We must follow that we should be niskabitz to come all together, and Memela will be able to have the proper mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. We should be zoicha, taka for the kibbutz golius to be able to makayim. Yet this year, the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh. Have a wonderful Shabbos.